15 years ago, on a cold October evening in 2009, 19-year-old Olivia Carter disappeared from the Carter family mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a family drowning in tragedy and despair. The disappearance plunged her parents, William and Margaret Carter, into a devastating depression that would consume their lives for over a decade, while the affluent Greenwich community found itself shaken to its core by the vanishing of their golden girl. Before you continue, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. Olivia Carter wasn't just any teenager. Born into wealth and privilege that most could only dream of, she was the sole heir to the Carter textile empire, a family business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Carters had been pillars of Greenwich society for 3 generations, their mansion on Round Hill Road serving as a symbol of American aristocracy. Olivia had everything: beauty, intelligence, unlimited resources, and a future that seemed written in gold. On October 13, 2009, Olivia returned home from her sophomore year at Yale University for what should have been a routine family dinner. Security footage from the estate's gates showed her silver BMW entering the property at 6:47 p.m. She was seen walking toward the main entrance, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, her long blonde hair catching the autumn light. It was the last time anyone would see her alive, or so they thought. The evening started normally according to household staff. Maria Santos, the family's longtime housekeeper, served dinner in the grand dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on mahogany walls lined with portraits of Carter ancestors. William Carter, a stern man in his 50s who had built the family fortune into an empire, sat at the head of the table discussing business ventures. Margaret, elegant and refined, spoke about upcoming charity galas and social obligations. But something was different that night. Several staff members later told investigators that tension filled the air like smoke. Voices were raised behind closed doors. The usual warmth of the Carter household had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to press against the mansion's walls. By 9:30 p.m., the staff had finished their duties and retired to their quarters in the estate's guest house, leaving the family alone in the sprawling mansion. When Margaret Carter woke the next morning, Olivia was gone. Her bed hadn't been slept in, her car remained in the garage, and her purse sat untouched on her bedroom vanity. The only thing missing was Olivia herself, as if she had simply evaporated into the Connecticut morning mist. The family's private security team immediately began searching the 50-acre estate, while William Carter contacted the Greenwich Police Department, setting in motion an investigation that would consume resources and generate headlines for months. The police response was swift and comprehensive. Detective James Morrison, a 20-year veteran with the Greenwich PD, led the investigation with the urgency that high-profile cases demanded. Within hours, search dogs were combing every inch of the property. Helicopters circled overhead, and dozens of officers interviewed staff members, neighbors, and anyone who might have information about Olivia's whereabouts. The investigation revealed a complex web of possibilities. Olivia's cell phone was found in her bedroom, making it impossible to track her movements. Security cameras around the property had mysterious gaps in their recordings from that crucial evening, suggesting either technical malfunction or deliberate tampering. The estate's security system, state-of-the-art for its time, showed no signs of forced entry or unauthorized access, leading investigators to consider that Olivia might have left voluntarily or that someone with intimate knowledge of the security protocols was involved. As days turned into weeks, the case attracted national attention. The story of the missing heiress dominated headlines, with news crews camping outside the Carter estate gates and reporters digging into every aspect of the family's private life. The pressure on law enforcement was immense, with the Carter family's political connections ensuring that every available resource was dedicated to finding their daughter. But despite extensive searches, interviews, and investigations that stretched across multiple states, no trace of Olivia Carter was found. The FBI joined the investigation, expanding the search nationwide and exploring possibilities ranging from kidnapping to voluntary disappearance. Psychics, private investigators, and amateur sleuths all offered their theories, but none led to concrete answers. The case that began with such promise and urgency gradually faded from the headlines as months passed without progress. The Greenwich Police Department maintained the investigation as an open case, But with no new leads or evidence, it essentially became dormant. The Carter family retreated from public life, their grief transforming into a private hell that would define their existence for the next 15 years. The Golden Girl of Greenwich had vanished as completely as morning fog, leaving behind only questions that seemed destined to remain forever unanswered. The months following Olivia Carter's disappearance transformed the prestigious Carter family from Greenwich royalty into prisoners of their own grief, while the community that once celebrated their success now whispered theories and suspicions behind closed doors. The investigation, which had started with such promise and resources, began to reveal cracks in the foundation of everything the Carters had built their lives upon. Detective Morrison and his team had conducted over 200 interviews by the end of 2009, speaking with everyone from Yale professors to Greenwich Country Club members. What emerged was a portrait of a young woman who, despite her privileged exterior, had been struggling with pressures that few could understand. Classmates described Olivia as increasingly withdrawn in the months before her disappearance, often skipping social events and spending long hours alone in her dorm room. Sarah Mitchell, Olivia's roommate at Yale, provided investigators with disturbing insights into the heiress's state of mind. She would get these phone calls from home that would leave her crying for hours, Sarah told detectives. She never talked about what they were about, but afterward, she would just stare out the window and say things like, "They don't understand," or "I can't do this anymore." I thought it was just typical family pressure about grades or her future, but looking back it felt much deeper than that. The investigation also uncovered tensions within the Carter family that their public image had carefully concealed. William Carter, while cooperating with police, displayed an unusual level of control over the flow of information. He hired a team of expensive lawyers who monitored every interview and restricted access to certain areas of the estate. When questioned about this level of legal protection, Carter claimed it was necessary to protect the family's privacy during their time of grief, but investigators found his behavior suspicious. Financial records revealed another layer of complexity to the case. Despite the family's apparent wealth, there were significant cash withdrawals from various accounts in the weeks leading up to Olivia's disappearance. William Carter explained these as normal business transactions, but the timing raised questions among investigators. Additionally, they discovered that Olivia had been researching legal procedures for emancipation from parental control, despite being only months away from her 20th birthday. Margaret Carter's behavior also troubled investigators. The grieving mother, who had initially been vocal in her pleas for Olivia's return, became increasingly reclusive as the investigation progressed. She refused most interview requests, and when she did speak with police, her answers were often vague or contradictory. She began taking prescription medications for anxiety and depression, which her doctors said was a normal response to trauma, but which also affected her ability to provide coherent information about the days leading up to Olivia's disappearance. The household staff, initially portrayed as a close-knit family of loyal employees, began revealing troubling dynamics within the Carter home. Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 12 years, eventually disclosed that she had witnessed heated arguments between Olivia and her father in the weeks before the disappearance. Mr. Carter, he wanted to control everything about Miss Olivia's life, she told investigators in broken English. Her friends, her studies, even who she could date. She was like a bird in a beautiful cage, but still a cage. The estate's head of security, Robert Thompson, a former police officer hired by the family in 2007, provided perhaps the most disturbing testimony. He revealed that William Carter had instructed him to increase surveillance of Olivia's activities in the months before her disappearance, including monitoring her phone calls and tracking her movements around campus. He said it was for her protection, Thompson told investigators, but it felt more like he was trying to control her every move. As winter turned to spring in 2010, the investigation began to stagnate. Despite following hundreds of leads and conducting extensive searches, investigators had found no physical evidence of what had happened to Olivia Carter. The case file grew thick with witness statements, forensic reports, and expert analyses, but none provided the breakthrough that everyone desperately sought. The Greenwich Police Department, under pressure from both the family and the media, brought in outside consultants and specialists. Criminal profilers suggested that Olivia might have been the victim of someone close to her, given the lack of signs of struggle and the sophisticated way her disappearance had been executed. However, without physical evidence or witnesses to any crime, these remained theories rather than actionable leads. The financial cost of the investigation was enormous, with the department dedicating significant resources to what many began to view as a cold case. The community pressure was equally intense, with wealthy residents demanding answers and threatening to withdraw support from local law enforcement if the case wasn't solved. The Carter family, meanwhile, increased their private security presence and hired additional investigators, creating a parallel investigation that sometimes conflicted with official police efforts. By the first anniversary of Olivia's disappearance, the case had essentially reached a dead end. Detective Morrison, despite his dedication and the resources at his disposal, had to admit that they were no closer to finding Olivia Carter than they had been on the day she vanished. The official investigation remained open, but with no new leads or evidence, it became just another file in the department's cold case division, a stark reminder of how even wealth and influence couldn't guarantee justice or closure. The Carter family's world had fundamentally changed, their golden reputation tarnished by unanswered questions and whispered suspicions that would follow them for years to come. The years that followed Olivia Carter's disappearance carved deep wounds into the fabric of the Carter family and the Greenwich community, transforming a story of privilege and promise into a haunting reminder of how quickly life can unravel. From 2010 to 2024, the case remained officially open but practically dormant, a ghost that continued to haunt everyone it had touched. William Carter, once a commanding presence in Connecticut's business circles, became increasingly isolated and paranoid. The textile empire that had been the family's pride for generations began to suffer under his distracted leadership. Board meetings were cancelled without explanation, important contracts were neglected, and longtime business partners found themselves shut out of decisions. By 2015, the Carter Corporation had lost nearly 40% of its value, forcing William to sell significant portions of the business to maintain the family's lifestyle and continue funding private investigators. Margaret Carter's descent was even more dramatic. The woman who had once graced the pages of society magazines and hosted elaborate charity galas became a shadow of her former self. She rarely left the mansion, spending her days in what had once been Olivia's room, surrounded by her daughter's belongings like a shrine to the life that had been cut short. Neighbors reported seeing her walking the estate grounds at all hours, sometimes calling out Olivia's name into the darkness. The household staff, once a stable presence in the mansion, turned over frequently as the family's behavior became increasingly erratic. Maria Santos, the loyal housekeeper, left in 2012 after reporting that Margaret Carter would sometimes insist she set a place at dinner for Olivia, becoming violently upset when reminded that her daughter wasn't coming home. Security Chief Robert Thompson resigned in 2013, later telling friends that the atmosphere in the house had become unbearably toxic. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested to know to which places and at which moments of the day or night these documented reports reach. The Greenwich community, meanwhile, developed its own relationship with the Carter mystery. The case became local folklore, with residents sharing theories and supposed sightings at dinner parties and coffee shops. Some claimed to have seen Olivia in New York City. Others insisted she had fled to Europe or South America. The mansion itself took on an ominous reputation, with local teenagers daring each other to approach the property at night, spreading stories about lights in windows and figures moving through the gardens. Detective Morrison retired in 2018, never having solved the case that had defined the latter part of his career. In his final interview before retirement, he expressed frustration at what he called walls of silence and money that had prevented the investigation from reaching its full potential. "Someone knows what happened to that girl," he said. "Whether it's someone in the family or someone they paid to keep quiet, the truth is out there. I just pray that someday it comes to light." The case file, now spanning 15 years, had grown to fill several storage boxes. New detectives were occasionally assigned to review the evidence, but none found the breakthrough that had eluded their predecessors. The FBI had officially closed their investigation in 2014, citing lack of new evidence and the passage of time. The local police maintained the case as open, but with minimal resources dedicated to active investigation. Private investigators hired by the Carter family came and went over the years, each promising breakthroughs that never materialized. Some claimed to have found evidence of Olivia living under assumed names in distant cities, while others suggested elaborate kidnapping scenarios involving organized crime or international trafficking. None of these theories produced verifiable evidence, leading many to question whether the family was being exploited by investigators seeking to profit from their desperation. The financial cost of the prolonged search had been enormous. By 2020, the Carter family had spent an estimated $3 million on private investigators, reward money, and legal fees. The reward for information leading to Olivia's return, initially set at $100,000, had been increased to $500,000, but it remained unclaimed as the years passed without credible leads. Technology advances brought periodic hope to the investigation. In 2016, police used new DNA analysis techniques to re-examine evidence from the scene, but found no new matches in criminal databases. Social media monitoring tools were employed to search for any online presence that might indicate Olivia was alive, but these efforts proved fruitless. Cold case television shows featured the story multiple times, generating hundreds of tips that investigators dutifully followed up on, only to reach dead ends. The psychological toll on everyone involved was immeasurable. William Carter suffered a minor heart attack in 2019, which doctors attributed partly to stress. Margaret Carter was hospitalized twice for severe depression and had been under psychiatric care for over a decade. Even investigators who had worked the case reported lasting effects, with several seeking counseling to deal with the frustration and helplessness of being unable to provide answers to a family in such obvious pain. By 2024, the Olivia Carter case had become a symbol of how even unlimited resources and determination couldn't always overcome the barriers that some secrets erect. The mansion on Round Hill Road stood as a monument to unanswered questions, its empty rooms holding memories of a young woman who had vanished as completely as if she had never existed at all. But sometimes the passage of time has a way of loosening the grip of even the most carefully guarded secrets, and truth has a persistent way of finding the light. March 15, 2024, began as an ordinary Friday morning at the Carter estate, but it would end as the day that finally cracked open 15 years of carefully maintained silence. The decision to renovate the mansion's aging foundation had been Margaret Carter's first major decision in years, driven by both practical necessity and a desperate need to change something in a life that had remained frozen since 2009. The renovation crew from Hartford Construction had been working on the project for 3 weeks, systematically updating the electrical systems and reinforcing the century-old foundation of the sprawling mansion. The basement, which had served primarily as storage space for the family's extensive collection of furniture, artwork, and business records, required extensive work to bring it up to modern safety standards. Foreman Jack Sullivan, a 30-year veteran of construction work who had seen his share of unusual discoveries in old buildings, was supervising the installation of new support beams when his crew made a finding that would change everything. "We were removing some of the old wooden paneling along the east wall," Sullivan later told investigators. "The wood was rotted in places, and when we pulled it away we found what looked like a door frame that had been sealed up and painted over so many times you could barely see it. The hidden door, measuring approximately 6 feet high and 3 feet wide, had been expertly concealed behind decorative wooden paneling that appeared to be original to the house's 1920s construction. What made the discovery even more intriguing was that the door showed signs of having been recently accessed. The paint around the edges was chipped and scraped, suggesting it had been opened and closed multiple times over the years. Sullivan's first instinct was to inform the homeowners before proceeding, but Margaret Carter was undergoing one of her increasingly frequent psychiatric episodes and had been hospitalized the previous week. William Carter was unreachable, reportedly on a business trip to Chicago, though his assistant seemed uncertain about his exact whereabouts. With no clear guidance from the property owners, Sullivan made the decision to carefully open the concealed door. What the construction crew found behind that door defied all expectations and immediately transformed a routine renovation into a crime scene. The hidden room, approximately 8 feet by 12 feet, had been converted into what could only be described as a secret living space. The walls were lined with built-in shelving containing hundreds of books, personal photographs, and what appeared to be years' worth of handwritten journals. A small bed was positioned against one wall, while a makeshift desk occupied the opposite corner. But it was the personal items scattered throughout the room that made Sullivan's blood run cold. Women's clothing hung from hooks on the walls, designer pieces that appeared to be from the late 2000s. A silver jewelry box sat open on the desk, revealing expensive pieces that sparkled in the construction crew's flashlight beams. Most disturbing of all were the dozens of framed photographs covering every available surface, all featuring the same young blonde woman that Sullivan recognized from the missing person posters that had once papered Greenwich. "I knew immediately we had found something connected to that Carter girl who disappeared," Sullivan said in his statement to police. "The room looked like someone had been living there, or at least spending significant time there. There was food storage, water bottles, even what looked like a small heating system that had been jury-rigged to work off the main house's electrical grid." The construction crew immediately secured the scene and contacted the Greenwich Police Department. Detective Sarah Chen, who had inherited the Carter case when Morrison retired, arrived at the estate within an hour of the initial call. What she found in that hidden room would breathe new life into an investigation that many had assumed would never be solved. The most significant discovery was a collection of leather-bound journals, dozens of them, filled with handwritten entries that appeared to span several years. The writing was clearly feminine, with dates ranging from 2007 through what appeared to be late 2009. Even a cursory examination of the journals revealed content that shed new light on Olivia Carter's disappearance and the family dynamics that may have led to the tragedy. Detective Chen also found evidence that the room had been accessed recently: fresh water bottles, recent newspapers, and what appeared to be prescription medications with dates from 2023 and 2024. This discovery raised the chilling possibility that someone had been using the room regularly, possibly for years after Olivia's disappearance, maintaining it as some kind of shrine or hiding place. The technical aspects of the room's construction were equally revealing. The concealed entrance showed signs of sophisticated planning and execution, suggesting that whoever created this space had significant knowledge of the house's structure and access to construction materials and expertise. The electrical work that powered the room's lighting and heating system had been professionally installed, though it bypassed the main house's electrical monitoring systems. As Detective Chen and her team began the painstaking process of cataloging and analyzing the room's contents, one journal entry in particular caught their attention. Written in what appeared to be Olivia's handwriting, it was dated October 12, 2009, one day before her disappearance. The entry began with words that would finally provide the breakthrough investigators had been seeking for 15 years. "Tomorrow I confront him about what I've discovered. If something happens to me, this room contains all the evidence anyone will need to understand why." The discovery of the hidden room marked the beginning of the end of the Carter family's carefully constructed version of events, and the start of a revelation that would expose secrets darker than anyone had imagined. The leather-bound journals discovered in Olivia Carter's secret room contained over 300 pages of handwritten entries that painted a devastating picture of life inside the prestigious Carter mansion. As Detective Chen and forensic specialists carefully transcribed and analyzed the documents, they uncovered a story of psychological manipulation, financial fraud, and family secrets that provided crucial context for understanding Olivia's disappearance. The earliest entries, dating back to 2007 when Olivia was just 17, revealed a young woman struggling with the immense pressure of being the sole heir to a family empire built on foundations far less stable than they appeared. "Father had another one of his emergency meetings with Uncle Richard today," read one entry from September 2007. "They think I don't understand what's happening, but I'm not stupid. The business is in trouble, and somehow that's supposed to be my problem to solve when I turn 21. The journals documented Olivia's growing awareness of financial irregularities within the Carter Corporation. Through overheard conversations and glimpsed documents, she had pieced together a complex web of embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraudulent investments that threatened to bring down not just the family business, but the entire Carter legacy. William Carter, it appeared, had been using his daughter's trust fund and inheritance as collateral for increasingly desperate business ventures. "I found the real financial statements today," Olivia wrote in January 2009. "We're not wealthy anymore. We're millions of dollars in debt. The house, the cars, even my college tuition is all being paid with borrowed money. But father keeps planning for my future as if I'm going to inherit a fortune instead of a mountain of debt and legal problems. The entries revealed that Olivia had been secretly documenting her father's activities, collecting evidence of financial crimes that could send him to federal prison. She had photographed documents, recorded conversations, and even hired a private accountant to help her understand the full scope of the family's financial deception. The hidden room had served as her base of operations for this investigation, a place where she could work without fear of discovery by her increasingly paranoid father. But the financial crimes were only part of the story that emerged from Olivia's journals. The young woman also documented a pattern of psychological abuse and control that had intensified as she approached her 20th birthday and the legal independence it would bring. William Carter had hired private investigators to monitor his daughter's activities, installed recording equipment in her bedroom, and even bribed university officials to provide him with reports on her academic performance and social relationships. He reads my mail, monitors my phone calls, and has someone following me on campus, Olivia wrote in March 2009. Mother pretends not to see what's happening, but she's as trapped as I am. The medication she takes isn't just for anxiety. It's to keep her compliant and quiet about what she knows. Sometimes I think she's been drugged so long she can't remember who she used to be. The journals also revealed Olivia's desperate attempts to find help from outside the family. She had contacted several lawyers about the possibility of reporting her father's financial crimes to federal authorities, but each consultation had ended in disappointment. The Carter family's connections in Connecticut's legal and political circles ran deep, and Olivia found that many of the attorneys she approached had conflicts of interest or were reluctant to take on such a powerful family. "I'm starting to understand that I can't trust anyone in Greenwich," she wrote in August 2009. "Father's influence reaches everywhere, and everyone owes him favors or money. The people who could help me are either afraid of him or financially dependent on him. I'm going to have to find another way." The final months documented in the journals showed Olivia's growing desperation and her realization that her 18th birthday would bring not freedom, but increased control from her father. She had discovered that William Carter had been forging her signature on financial documents since she was 16, creating a paper trail that made her appear complicit in the family's financial crimes. If the business collapsed, she would likely face criminal charges alongside her father. "I finally understand his plan," Olivia wrote in September 2009. "He's not just stealing my inheritance, he's setting me up to take the blame for everything. The prosecutors will see a spoiled rich girl who was complicit in her family's crimes, not a victim who was manipulated and controlled her entire life. I have to act before my 20th birthday, or I'll spend the rest of my life in prison for crimes I didn't commit." The most chilling entries came from October 2009, just days before Olivia's disappearance. She had finally gathered enough evidence to expose her father's crimes and had scheduled a meeting with federal investigators for October 15th, 2 days after she vanished. The journal entries from those final days revealed a young woman who was both terrified and determined, knowing that confronting her father could be dangerous, but believing she had no other choice. "I've made copies of everything and hidden them where father will never find them," she wrote on October 10th. "If something happens to me, the evidence will eventually surface. I just hope someone will have the courage to act on it." The final entry, dated October 12, 2009, contained words that would haunt investigators. "Tomorrow I tell father that I know everything. I'm not going to let him destroy any more lives, even if it costs me mine. If you're reading this and I'm gone, you'll know why." As Detective Chen finished reading the last journal entry, the pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle finally began falling into place, revealing a truth darker than anyone had imagined. The journal entries from October 12, 2009, provided investigators with a detailed timeline of Olivia Carter's final day, revealing the careful planning that had gone into what she knew would be the most dangerous conversation of her life. The entries, written throughout the day in her characteristic precise handwriting, documented her final preparations and the growing sense of dread that consumed her as evening approached. 6 a.m. I barely slept. "Today is the day I've been preparing for, but I'm terrified. I've hidden copies of all the evidence in 3 different locations. If something happens to me, at least the truth will eventually come out. I keep telling myself that father wouldn't hurt his own daughter, But the man I've discovered over these past months isn't the father I thought I knew. The morning entries revealed that Olivia had spent her last day at Yale, making final arrangements for her planned testimony to federal investigators. She had contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and provided them with preliminary evidence of the Carter Corporation's fraudulent activities. Agent Michael Torres had been assigned to her case and was scheduled to conduct a formal interview on October 15th, a meeting that would never take place. 2 p.m. Agent Torres called to confirm Thursday's meeting. I told him I was having dinner with my father tonight to give him one last chance to come clean. Torres warned me against confronting father alone, but I have to try. Despite everything he's done, he's still my father. Maybe if I show him the evidence I've gathered, he'll realize it's over and agree to cooperate with the investigation. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps the story of Olivia Carter reach more people. The entries from the afternoon revealed Olivia's meticulous preparation for the confrontation. She had written detailed letters to Agent Torres, her roommate Sarah, and her estranged uncle Richard, explaining everything she had discovered and providing them with locations where she had hidden copies of the incriminating evidence. These letters, she wrote, were to be delivered only if she failed to make contact within 48 hours of the scheduled FBI meeting. 4:30 p.m. I've reviewed all the evidence one final time. The fraudulent investment schemes, the embezzlement from client accounts, the forged documents using my signature. It's all there. Father has stolen over $12 million and used my trust fund as collateral for loans that funded his gambling debts. The business is essentially bankrupt, and he's been using money from new investors to pay off old debts. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, and when it collapses, he planned to make it look like I was the mastermind. The drive from New Haven to Greenwich gave Olivia time for final reflection, and her journal entries from the car revealed the full scope of her emotional turmoil. She wrote about childhood memories of the father she had loved and respected, contrasting them with the criminal she had discovered him to be. The entries showed a young woman grappling with the reality that exposing her father's crimes would destroy not just him but likely her mother as well. 6 p.m. I'm in the driveway now. The house looks the same as always, but everything has changed. I keep thinking about the family dinners we used to have when I was little, when Father would tell stories about building the business and teaching me about responsibility and integrity. How could the man who taught me those values become someone capable of such deception? The final journal entry before dinner was brief but foreboding. 6:45 p.m. Mother looks terrible. Her medication has been increased again, and she barely acknowledged my arrival. I don't think she's capable of understanding what's happening anymore. Father is in his study making phone calls. I can hear him yelling at someone about money and deadlines. When he comes to dinner, I'll be ready. What happened during the confrontation itself had to be reconstructed from physical evidence and witness statements, as Olivia's journal entries ended with her preparation for dinner. However, investigators found additional documentation that provided crucial insight into the evening's events. Hidden in the secret room was a small digital recorder that Olivia had apparently carried to dinner, containing audio of the confrontation that would finally solve the mystery of her disappearance. The recording, nearly 2 hours long, began with normal dinner conversation, but quickly escalated as Olivia presented her father with the evidence she had gathered. William Carter's voice, initially dismissive, became increasingly angry as he realized the extent of his daughter's investigation. The conversation revealed a man desperate to maintain control, alternating between threats, bribes, and emotional manipulation. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," William Carter's voice could be heard saying. "Everything I've done was to protect this family, to maintain our position in society. You're too young and naive to understand the sacrifices that success requires." Olivia's responses, captured clearly on the recording, showed remarkable courage in the face of her father's escalating rage. She calmly presented evidence of each crime, explained how she had documented his activities, and gave him a final ultimatum: voluntarily surrender to federal authorities or face exposure when she met with Agent Torres in 2 days. The recording captured the moment when William Carter realized that his daughter's investigation threatened not just his freedom, but his entire conception of himself as the family patriarch. His voice became cold and calculated as he began to discuss alternatives to Olivia's planned cooperation with federal investigators. "There are ways to handle this situation that don't involve destroying the family name, Carter's voice said near the end of the recording. You are going to give me those documents and call off this meeting with the FBI, or there will be consequences you haven't considered. The recording ended abruptly, with the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and Olivia's voice saying, "You can't intimidate me anymore, Father. I'm done being afraid of you." What happened in the moments after the recording ended would remain unknown, but the discovery of the audio provided investigators with the first concrete evidence of William Carter's motive for silencing his daughter permanently. The discovery of Olivia's recorded confrontation with her father provided Detective Chen with the breakthrough she needed to finally move beyond speculation and begin building a case against William Carter. The audio recording, combined with the evidence found in the secret room, painted a clear picture of motive and opportunity that had been missing from the investigation for 15 years. Within hours of analyzing the recording, Detective Chen obtained a warrant to search the entire Carter estate and to bring William Carter in for questioning. The search, conducted by a team of forensic specialists, revealed additional evidence that had been overlooked during the initial investigation in 2009. Hidden in William Carter's private study were financial documents that corroborated Olivia's accusations of embezzlement and fraud, including handwriting analysis that confirmed he had been forging his daughter's signature on various legal and financial documents since she was 17. William Carter, now 68 and visibly aged by 15 years of carrying the secret of his daughter's fate, initially maintained his innocence when confronted with the recording. His attorney, Thomas Brennan, argued that the audio only proved that father and daughter had disagreed about business matters, not that any crime had been committed. However, when forensic accountants began analyzing the financial evidence Olivia had gathered, the scope of William Carter's criminal activities became undeniable. The Carter Corporation, investigators discovered, had been operating as a sophisticated Ponzi scheme for over 5 years before Olivia's disappearance. William Carter had been using money from new investors to pay returns to existing clients, while siphoning millions of dollars to cover his gambling debts and maintain the family's lavish lifestyle. Olivia's trust fund, worth over $8 million, had been completely depleted and replaced with fraudulent documentation showing investments that never existed, but it was the discovery of additional physical evidence that finally broke William Carter's resolve. During the expanded search of the estate, investigators found buried in a remote corner of the property what appeared to be items belonging to Olivia, clothing, jewelry, and personal effects that showed signs of violence. DNA analysis confirmed that blood found on several items matched Olivia's genetic profile from samples taken from her personal belongings years earlier. Margaret Carter, hospitalized during the initial search, was brought in for questioning once her doctors determined she was mentally competent to provide testimony. The years of psychiatric medication had indeed been part of her husband's efforts to keep her compliant and silent, but they had also preserved her memory of the events of October 13, 2009. Under careful questioning by Detective Chen, Margaret slowly revealed the truth about her daughter's final night. "I heard them arguing in the dining room," Margaret said in a voice barely above a whisper. "It went on for hours. William was screaming about betrayal and family loyalty. I wanted to intervene, but I was so heavily medicated I could barely walk. Around midnight, I heard Olivia's voice in the hallway outside my bedroom. She was crying and saying, 'I'm sorry, Mother. I tried to save us all.'" Margaret's testimony revealed that she had seen William Carter leaving the house in the early morning hours of October 14th, returning several hours later with dirt on his clothes and scratches on his hands. When she asked where Olivia was, he told her their daughter had left for an extended trip to Europe and wouldn't be returning for several months. Margaret's medication was increased significantly in the days following, making it difficult for her to think clearly about the discrepancies in her husband's story. "I knew something terrible had happened," Margaret continued, tears streaming down her face. "But I was so afraid, and the medication made everything feel like a dream. I kept waiting for Olivia to call or write, but William said she had cut off all contact with the family. Part of me believed him because it was easier than facing the truth." The breakthrough in Margaret Carter's testimony came when she revealed that William had confessed to her during one of his drinking episodes in 2015. He was drunk and rambling about how he never meant for things to go so far. He said Olivia had left him no choice, that she was going to destroy everything he had built. "He told me he had handled the situation, and that she would never cause problems for the family again. As the evidence mounted, William Carter's legal strategy shifted from denial to damage control. Through his attorney, he began negotiating for a plea agreement that would avoid the death penalty in exchange for revealing the location of Olivia's remains. The negotiations revealed the cold calculation behind what he had done to his daughter. According to Carter's eventual confession, the confrontation with Olivia had escalated beyond verbal arguments. When she refused to abandon her plan to cooperate with federal investigators, he had attacked her in a moment of rage, striking her with a heavy glass paperweight from the dining room sideboard. The blow had been fatal, killing his daughter almost instantly. Panicked by what he had done, Carter had spent the rest of the night disposing of evidence and creating the elaborate cover-up that had fooled investigators for 15 years. He had used his knowledge of the estate's grounds to bury Olivia's body in a location that had never been thoroughly searched, then spent weeks methodically removing any evidence that might lead to the discovery of his crime. The most chilling aspect of Carter's confession was his admission that he had continued to use the secret room for years after Olivia's death, maintaining it as a twisted shrine to the daughter he had killed. The recent evidence found in the room, the fresh water bottles and newspapers, had been placed there by Carter himself during his regular visits to what he called his place of remembrance. "I went there when I needed to feel close to her," Carter said during his confession. "I know that sounds insane, but losing Olivia destroyed me too. I just couldn't let her destroy everything I had worked for. The business, our family's reputation, our place in society, it would have all been gone." The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted a picture of a man who had become so consumed with maintaining his public image that he was willing to kill his own daughter rather than face the consequences of his criminal actions. The tragedy of Olivia Carter was not just that she had been murdered, but that she had died trying to save the very family that had ultimately destroyed her. The trial of William Carter began on September 15, 2024, in the Superior Court of Connecticut, marking the culmination of a 15-year journey from mysterious disappearance to shocking family betrayal. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, Greenwich residents who had followed the case for years, and family members seeking closure from one of the most disturbing crimes in the area's history. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, a veteran of high-profile cases with the state's attorney's office, presented a methodical case that traced William Carter's transformation from respected businessman to desperate criminal. The prosecution's opening statement laid out a timeline that began with Carter's gambling addiction and financial crimes in the early 2000s and culminated in the murder of his own daughter when she threatened to expose his activities. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Walsh said in her opening remarks, "this is not a story about a business failure or a family argument that got out of hand. This is the story of a man who chose greed over integrity, power over family, and ultimately murder over accountability. Olivia Carter died because she had the courage to stand up to a father who had lost all sense of right and wrong." The prosecution's case was built on multiple layers of evidence that had been gathered both during the original investigation and in the months following the discovery of the secret room. The financial evidence alone was overwhelming. Forensic accountants testified that William Carter had embezzled over $15 million from investors and had used Olivia's inheritance as collateral for increasingly desperate business ventures. The most damning evidence came from Olivia herself, in the form of the audio recording she had made during her final confrontation with her father. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Olivia's voice, preserved through 15 years of mystery, accused her father of destroying the family's financial future and demanding that he surrender to federal authorities. William Carter's responses, captured clearly on the recording, showed a man becoming increasingly desperate and threatening as he realized his crimes were about to be exposed. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a forensic psychologist who had analyzed the recording, testified about the psychological dynamics revealed in the conversation. "What we hear in this recording is a classic example of a narcissistic personality being confronted with the collapse of their carefully constructed false reality," Dr. Morrison explained. William Carter's responses show someone who views his daughter not as a human being with her own rights and agency, but as a possession that is threatening his control. Margaret Carter's testimony, delivered over 3 days with frequent breaks for her emotional well-being, provided the jury with devastating insight into the family dynamics that had led to tragedy. Her description of the years following Olivia's disappearance painted a picture of a household consumed by secrets and sustained by lies. Margaret testified that her husband had systematically isolated her through medication and psychological manipulation, making it impossible for her to seek help or question his version of events. "I became a ghost in my own home," Margaret said through tears. "William controlled everything. What I ate, what I watched on television, who I could talk to on the phone. When I asked about Olivia, he would become angry and increase my medication. I was so drugged that most days I couldn't remember if Olivia had called or visited. I lived in a fog of confusion and grief for 15 years. The defense team, led by Thomas Brennan, faced a nearly impossible task in defending their client against such overwhelming evidence. Their strategy focused on arguing that William Carter's actions were the result of severe mental illness rather than premeditated murder. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified about the psychological effects of gambling addiction and financial stress, arguing that Carter had suffered a psychotic break during the confrontation with his daughter. "William Carter is not a cold-blooded killer," Brennan argued in his opening statement. "He is a man who was destroyed by his own demons and made a terrible decision in a moment of complete psychological breakdown. The William Carter who built a successful business and provided for his family is not the same man who committed this tragic act 15 years ago." The defense also attempted to portray Olivia as a naive young woman who didn't understand the complexities of business and had misinterpreted her father's legitimate financial strategies as criminal activities. This approach backfired spectacularly when the prosecution presented testimony from FBI agent Torres, who confirmed that the evidence Olivia had provided to federal investigators was not only accurate, but had been gathered with sophisticated understanding of complex financial crimes. Miss Carter demonstrated a level of investigative skill and financial knowledge that impressed experienced federal agents, Torres testified. She wasn't a confused teenager making accusations against her father. She was a methodical investigator who had documented a complex criminal enterprise with remarkable precision. The trial's most dramatic moment came when William Carter took the stand in his own defense, against the advice of his attorneys. His testimony, intended to show remorse and mental illness, instead revealed the calculating mind that had orchestrated both the financial crimes and the elaborate cover-up of his daughter's murder. Under cross-examination by prosecutor Walsh, Carter's facade of repentance crumbled as he was confronted with evidence of his continued deception in the years following Olivia's death. Walsh presented evidence that Carter had filed false insurance claims related to Olivia's disappearance and had continued embezzling from investors even after killing his daughter to prevent exposure of his crimes. "Mr. Carter," Walsh asked during a particularly intense exchange, "if you were truly sorry for what happened to Olivia, why did you continue visiting the secret room where she had gathered evidence against you? Why did you maintain that space as a shrine while lying to investigators about her disappearance?" Carter's response revealed the twisted psychology that had driven his actions. "That room was where I could still feel connected to her. It was the only place where I could remember the daughter I loved before she turned against me." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with a verdict of guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the horror of a father who had murdered his own daughter to protect his criminal activities. At sentencing, Judge Patricia Hawkins delivered a scathing assessment of William Carter's crimes and their impact on both his family and the community. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Hawkins said, "I have rarely encountered a case that reveals such a complete moral bankruptcy. You didn't just murder your daughter. You stole her future, destroyed your wife's mental health, and corrupted the memory of a young woman who died trying to do the right thing." William Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing legal closure to a case that had haunted Greenwich for 15 years. The conviction of William Carter brought legal resolution to the Olivia Carter case, but the aftermath of the trial revealed that some wounds cut too deep for any verdict to fully heal. On November 3, 2024, exactly 15 years and 3 weeks after Olivia's disappearance, her remains were finally recovered from the remote corner of the Carter estate, where her father had buried her in the dark hours following her murder. The discovery of Olivia's body allowed for the closure that her family and the community had sought for so long, but it also brought new heartbreak. Forensic examination confirmed that Olivia had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with William Carter's confession that he had struck her with a glass paperweight during their confrontation. The medical examiner determined that death had been nearly instantaneous, providing some small comfort to those who had wondered whether she had suffered. Margaret Carter, now 63 and finally free from the medication that had clouded her mind for over a decade, attended every day of the recovery operation. Watching as investigators carefully excavated the makeshift grave where her husband had hidden their daughter, Margaret faced the full horror of what her family had become. "I feel like I'm waking up from a 15-year nightmare," she told Detective Chen. "But now I have to live with the knowledge that I was in the same house with Olivia's killer all these years." The funeral service for Olivia Carter, held at Greenwich's Christ Church on November 15, 2024, drew hundreds of mourners who came to pay respects to a young woman whose life had been cut short by the person who should have protected her most. The service featured readings from Olivia's journals that revealed her hopes and dreams for the future, plans to use her inheritance to start a foundation for young women in crisis, dreams of traveling the world and writing novels, aspirations to build a life based on honesty and integrity rather than the deception that had defined her family. Sarah Mitchell, Olivia's college roommate who had maintained hope for her friend's return throughout the 15 years of uncertainty, delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of who Olivia had been before her life was destroyed by family secrets. "Olivia was the strongest person I've ever known," Sarah said through tears. "She could have taken the easy path, could have ignored what she discovered and lived comfortably off money stolen from others. Instead, she chose to fight for what was right, even though she knew it might cost her everything. Her courage in standing up to corruption, even within her own family, should inspire all of us." The financial aftermath of the case was almost as devastating as the personal tragedy. The collapse of the Carter Corporation, once the investigation revealed the extent of the fraud, left dozens of investors facing significant losses. Federal authorities recovered only a fraction of the stolen money, most of which had been lost to William Carter's gambling addiction or spent maintaining the family's lavish lifestyle. The Carter estate, including the mansion that had housed so many dark secrets, was sold to help compensate victims of the financial crimes. Margaret Carter, facing both civil lawsuits from defrauded investors and the emotional trauma of learning her husband was a murderer, made the difficult decision to liquidate all remaining family assets. The proceeds went toward restitution for her husband's victims and to establish the Olivia Carter Foundation for Financial Crime Victims, ensuring that her daughter's memory would be associated with justice and protection rather than the tragedy that had claimed her life. Detective Chen, whose dedication to solving the case had finally brought justice for Olivia, reflected on the lessons learned from 15 years of investigation. "This case taught me that sometimes the biggest obstacles to justice aren't lack of evidence or resources. They're the walls of silence that families build around their darkest secrets," she said. Olivia Carter died because she refused to be complicit in that silence. Her courage in documenting her father's crimes and confronting him directly saved other people from being victimized, even though it cost her own life. The Greenwich community, which had spent 15 years speculating about Olivia's fate, struggled to process the reality that the answer had been hidden within one of their most prominent families all along. The case sparked discussions about the dangers of unchecked power and privilege, and the way that wealth and social status can be used to conceal criminal activity. Several residents who had known the Carter family personally expressed guilt about not recognizing the signs of abuse and control that Olivia had been experiencing. The hidden room where Olivia had conducted her investigation became, in a sense, her most lasting monument. Before the mansion was demolished in early 2025, investigators carefully preserved the space, cataloging every document and photograph that Olivia had gathered as evidence of her father's crimes. The room served as a testament to a young woman's determination to expose the truth, even when that truth threatened to destroy everything she had ever known. Agent Torres, the FBI investigator who had been scheduled to meet with Olivia on October 15, 2009, carried particular regret about the case. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if she had contacted us sooner, or if we had insisted on meeting with her immediately, instead of waiting for our scheduled appointment," he said. "Olivia Carter had already done most of our work for us. She had documented a complex financial conspiracy with remarkable skill. If we had acted faster, she might still be alive today. The psychological impact of the case extended far beyond those directly involved. Mental health professionals in the Greenwich area reported increased requests for counseling services, particularly from individuals dealing with family trauma and financial abuse. The Olivia Carter case became a teaching example in psychology programs, illustrating the devastating effects of narcissistic abuse within families and the courage required to break cycles of secrecy and control. As 2024 came to a close, the empty lot where the Carter mansion once stood served as a quiet reminder of how quickly lives built on deception can collapse. The manicured gardens were overgrown, the grand driveway was cracked and weedy, but visitors still came regularly, some drawn by morbid curiosity, others seeking to pay respects to a young woman who had died trying to do the right thing. Margaret Carter, now living in a modest apartment in Hartford and working with a trauma counselor to rebuild her identity after decades of psychological manipulation, made a pilgrimage to her daughter's grave every week. On one such visit in December 2024, she was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as a journalism student researching financial crime and family abuse. "Mrs. Carter," the student asked gently, "what would you want people to remember about Olivia?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, looking at the headstone that bore her daughter's name and the dates that bookended a life cut tragically short. "I want them to remember that she was braver than anyone should have to be," she finally said. "She could have chosen to stay silent and live comfortably with stolen money. Instead, she chose to fight for justice even though she was fighting alone against people who should have loved and protected her. Olivia's courage saved other people from being victimized by her father, and that courage cost her everything. That's the legacy I want people to remember." The Olivia Carter case closed officially on December 31, 2024, but its impact continues to resonate. The young woman who had disappeared without a trace 15 years earlier had finally received the justice she had died seeking, and her story serves as both a tragedy and an inspiration, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage beyond measure, and that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Olivia Carter's story. We'll see you in the next video. In the end, Olivia Carter's greatest achievement was not the wealth she might have inherited or the social position she could have claimed, but the courage she showed in refusing to be complicit in her family's crimes. Her hidden room, filled with evidence and journals, became her final testimony, a young woman's determined effort to ensure that truth would survive, even if she did not.